I'm pleased today to introduce Melina Kennedy. Melina is the CEO of CEOs of Indiana Corporate Partnership. At CEOs of Indiana Corporate Partnership, she works at the intersection of business leadership, innovation, and economic development. Over the course of a career in law, in public service, in industry, she's served in senior leadership roles at Cummins Engine. I guess they don't go by Cummins Engine, they're just Cummins now, right? Cummins Inc. Worked as Deputy Mayor for the City of Indianapolis, and then is in her current role helps advance civic and economic initiatives across the state of Indiana. We were excited to get her here because we have speakers who sometimes can talk about their experience in the private sector, and sometimes speakers who can talk about what it's like to be in the nonprofit sector. It's rare to get somebody who has been in each of those different sort of environments and can speak about what it's like to have a career in each of those three. In particular, we're excited to hear her reflections on business leadership. We do want to acknowledge that the speaker series, the Principled Business Leadership Speaker Series, is made possible by a generous grant from the Doug and Maria DeVos Foundation, and so we appreciate their support for Purdue University and for the Daniel School of Business. And so that's part of why we're here, but more broadly, we're going to make sure we leave time at the end so that those of you who have questions, the students in particular, but you'll have the opportunity to ask questions, and I hope you'll take advantage of that because it's rare and great for us to get someone with Melina's background. So I'm going to first let's join me in welcoming Melina to Purdue University and to the Daniel School. And I joked that she risked life and limb on I-65 to get up here in rush hour. When I want to start, I've been thinking about the progress of your career, and very often students will ask, sort of, way back when you were, not way back, that sounded bad, but when you were sort of graduating and beginning your career, before titles and positions and which companies or which organizations am I going to work for, I'm curious, what are the problems or the questions that you were initially really interested in trying to solve?
Great question. Well, first of all, thank you, Tim and Andrea, for helping organize today, and for all of you for being here, whether you got credit or not. Glad you're here. Also want to say thank you to Rich and Joanne. We have a board member in the house and a leader here in the business school, so what an honor. Really happy to be here today. And, your question is a great one. I have different kind of pivots in my career that I'll talk a little bit about, where I tried different things. But when I go back all the way to undergrad, for me, I was studying environmental science and history at a joint major. And at the time, my interest was learning how I might be able in a professional career in the future to contribute to environmental science and what that might look like. And I will be honest with you, at that time, I really had no idea what that looked like. I came from a family that had a restaurant, a Greek restaurant downtown Chicago. That was my growing up. So I knew a lot about, wiping down tables and customer service, but I didn't know anything about what, my career might be in the future. And so I in undergrad, I just leaned into something that was really interesting to me and had the ability to have some leap of faith that would go somewhere in the future. I just leaned in and learned and worked hard to learn and get a degree, and then things went on from there, which we'll talk about.
Good.
But the problem I think I was trying to solve was just to try to understand what role could I play in the environment.
Great. If you can think back to that, at the beginning of your career, was there a moment or a person who for you sort of was your first sort of strong impression of what a principled leader might look like?
Well, yes. I've been fortunate to have a lot of role models along the way in my professional career, but really the first kind of leader who I think really helped me see principled leadership was my first job after law school. So I went on to law school. my first job out of law school was clerking for a judge on the Indiana Supreme Court named Frank Sullivan. He is now retired. But he was just such a strong, principled leader who he loved the law. And he took the role that he had as a judge on the Indiana Supreme Court, very much to heart, and taught me that, it's a privilege to be able to be in a position where you are trying to resolve important issues for the state. And I just got to watch him and learn from him in the way he was fair and thoughtful and analytic, and wanted to make sure that every breath he took in that role was for the purpose of what he was in that seat for.
Okay, so let's dive in, because at the beginning of your career, you started in the private sector. Right, so you spent a fair amount of time at Cummins. You had some senior leadership roles. What attracted you to a career in the private sector?
So I was in the private sector, both in law. So I practiced law at a law firm in Indianapolis for a number of years, and I loved that. I enjoyed being in the legal industry, because it is about really trying to solve problems for people, to analyze issues and advocate for the right answer, or to help bring resolution to something that's a challenge and there's dispute. So I enjoyed that. I got to industry at Cummins one step after that, or two steps after that, I should say. So I practiced law for a number of years. My first kind of pivot professionally was to local government when I was practicing law. And I was not from Indiana. I didn't know a ton of people. So I was interested in kind of volunteering and getting to know the community. There was a candidate running for mayor of Indianapolis, Bart Peterson, who ended up being mayor, who I didn't know much about him or the world of local government, but he was looking for volunteers to do research on his campaign. And so I signed up to do that. And it was really interesting. I learned a lot about municipal government in a volunteer way. And eventually, when he became mayor, that was kind of my first pivot out of law school into local government, where I worked in economic development and eventually ended up being deputy mayor for Indianapolis. And it's a wonderful opportunity to learn a lot about business and economic development in the city. That was kind of my in-between. I ended up at Cummins a few years later and spent 12 years there. And that was a wonderful opportunity to be in the corporate setting that is a very global company that has a very, I think, important purpose of trying to power the world, with technologies that continue to be cleaner and cleaner, and innovating toward cleaner technologies. And it was just an awesome opportunity to be in the private sector. And I loved the opportunity in particular to be in a global setting. I traveled the world. I worked with people from all over the world, and I thought that was just an incredible opportunity right here from Indiana.
So I'm curious, because a lot of people early in their career, myself included, you sort of have the plan, everything mapped out, how it's going to go. When you started doing unpaid volunteer work, was it something that you thought would lead to a career pivot, or was it something that was unexpected?
It was 100% not something that I thought would lead to a career pivot. Not even really crossed my mind. And I think one thing that I'd like to just say, building upon your question, is that I can honestly say that when I was in college, pretty much every job that I've held, CEOs of Indiana Corporate Partnership, vice president and officer at a Fortune 200 company called Cummins, deputy mayor, I had never heard of those things, like literally never heard of them. So if that gives you some peace and comfort that you shouldn't feel like you have to know exactly what you're going to do right now, learn, get a great education, and you are getting a great education. This is a phenomenal school. Purdue, and specifically the Daniel School of Business. That's not something to take lightly. It will really position you for a lot of things into the future, and I wouldn't put the onus on yourself to feel like you need to know every single job you're going to have from now until your future professional career. I didn't, that's for sure.
I'm curious, because you mentioned this in the reception. One of the students had asked, how do you know when it's time to pivot. And earlier you talked about both the times when you considered it and didn't, and the times when you did. How do you know?
It's a very case-by-case question, and it can apply whether it's your first job, your second job, or moving, all those kinds of things. And I guess what I would suggest if you're making a big pivot to a new job or a new city is really take the time to do what probably sounds obvious, but just step back and pause and really reflect on the reasons that would be a good choice, the reasons that would not be a good choice, and then lean in on people that are important to you that you can trust, that you can talk this through. So I used the example earlier when we were meeting with a smaller group of students. It was a really scary pivot for me to leave Cummins. It was a great organization. I loved the work there. And the CICP, the organization that I'm in now, the person before me retired, and so that I got a call, that we're looking for someone who has business and law and policy experience. Like, you've got a good kind of background for that. And it was kind of scary for me to think about leaving, such a great company. So for me, what I did is I stepped back and I really reflected on what are the things that I love doing that really bring me a lot of energy, and what are the things that I don't love as much that kind of drain me but are important. And when I did that exercise, really the things that I do and the role that I'm in now really are the things that bring me a lot of energy. And it was kind of clear. Even though I loved Cummins, it was a great place, and I was scared and sad to leave, it really felt right. And I don't think if I had taken that time to really try to spend some intentional time thinking about those things that I would have really known. And then I leaned into a few close people to me, some with lots of experience, some my 21-year-old son who was like, "Mom, duh, this makes a lot of sense for you." So, you gotta lean on your friends and your close confidence as well, and don't feel like you have to make decisions like that alone. But that's how I approached it.
The lawyer in me, I know a lot of people who've been at firms where they feel like they are, officers of the court, they practicing sort of principled legal practice, and the concern when they go in-house to a company is that they'll be pressed to make compromises for profit. So how did you manage the transition to being an in-house counsel, and, well, not even just an in-house counsel, but part of the leadership of a for-profit business? And how does leadership at a private company like Cummins differ from what you experienced in local government?
Well, one of the things that I thought was really incredible at Cummins that I didn't really have as much access to in local government was leadership development. And so the CEO of Cummins at that time, who was my boss, was very much invested in leadership development throughout the company. So I had access to a lot of group kind of cohorts and coaching and things like that about leadership. The current CEO, by the way, who is amazing, is a Purdue grad you probably know, Jen Rumsey, and she's continued that tradition. She's a great example of someone who, she's got her own story, of course, to share, where she had years of experience at Cummins in leadership development and has continued that work with her leadership team going into the future. And so that was actually something really unanticipated for me that I didn't realize I would have access to. And Cummins really leans into, and had when I was there, leadership development and really helping leaders be authentic and learn, what are some of the critical skills that make you a good leader, and invests in that. And I was really lucky to have access to that. A lot of governments and other things like that don't have the opportunity or the funding to be able to do that. So that was really very much something I benefited from and very grateful for.
This is a question actually one of my colleagues said. Ask her this. What principles, so as you moved up into greater responsibility, what principles for you in a leader and in the people that you worked with became non-negotiables, right? You have to have them to be effective in the role.
Well, I think you cannot be effective as a leader if you can't build trust. So integrity, and that can mean a lot of different things, but saying what you're going to do and doing it, being honest and doing the right thing, those things are really important to build trust so that you have a team that follows you or a customer who wants to buy your product and believes in you. That is so critical and essential that to me, that's, someone asked me earlier today, like, what's one of the top things? I would say that. But there are many other attributes and principles that are really critical as well.
This is a related question that we sometimes talk about in our ethics class. What's the difference, in your view, your experience, between being an effective manager and an effective leader?
So an effective manager can be successful in kind of getting the task and the job done, but may not have the longevity and the vision to keep it going and sustain. An effective leader has many attributes, including being able to set a vision, which is really important, communicate that, which is really important, and align a team, which is really important, to really carry forth a sustainable infrastructure, for lack of a better word, to continue to do great things. And so a manager might be good at just kind of getting the task at hand done, regardless of building trust or whatnot. But a really good leader sets that vision and really aligns a team around what that vision is so that you can really continue to do not just the tasks at hand, but accomplish something big.
Can you share a moment from your career that you think sort of defines an example of a difficult moment where you were faced to make a hard choice, and what you learned from that experience? If there have been any.
Oh, yeah. Let me count the ways. Many examples. I'll think of one. This dates back, but when I worked for the city of Indianapolis, when I was in economic development, and I received the phone call from United Airlines to tell us that they were going to be vacating our 1 million square foot maintenance facility in Indianapolis. And the next day they were going to announce they were laying off 1,500 employees. And that was just kind of an absolute blow. And so, we had to kind of step back and decide, do we just mothball this facility and kind of cut our losses and move on? Or do we try to rally, a task force and a team to really try to find out what can we do to help the employees, to help make sure the facility is utilized? And so I'll fast forward. It was a long process, but we took the choice of, we're going to make the decision to try to do something different. And along the way, you can imagine a lot of different entities approached the city and said, hey, let me have access to this facility, and we don't have any credit or security, but we'll do something big. And you can't do that with an asset like that. So we had to say no several times, even though that was kind of painful, to ultimately find a tenant that could bring in jobs. And so that required not moving too fast. That required sometimes saying no. That required taking a chance that an easier path might have been just to kind of mothball the thing. And those were some of the examples I think about that really, looking back, were tough decisions that we had to really think about what is the best path.
This one's a slightly different direction, but another question that someone suggested was, how do you, and I think this is maybe a reference to your time at Cummins, how do you lead a team of experts when you're not the expert in the room?
That is such a great question. First, I'll start with some kind of more high-level attributes. First of all, you have to be humble, and you have to recognize what you do and you don't know, and own that. Secondly, you have to also be willing to learn and be curious and ask questions. I remember when I was in the rail business at Cummins, so I led our, Cummins makes engines for locomotives. It's a cool business. That's one of my favorite roles I've held. And I didn't have rail background, but the team at that time really, who did have very deep technical rail expertise, did not have expertise in contracts and organizational management and things like that I brought to the table. And at that time, we were just cementing a deal with a new customer in Siemens to launch a high-speed locomotive product in the U.S. And so coming into that, I had to recognize I have to ask a lot of questions, and I don't want to pretend like I know, the ins and outs of the science and engineering of specific locomotive engine requirements. I need to be honest about that and be humble and ask the team to lean in, but bring to the table what I can bring to the table. And it ended up being really quite a good match of skills for the team that was very rail technical savvy and someone who brought in something else that the team at that point in time wasn't super excited about. But I remember once one of my the employees on my team, a service engineer who I still keep in touch with, a phenomenal person, he pulled me aside one day and he said, "Stop always apologizing for the questions you're asking." Because I'd be in these engineering meetings and I'd ask these questions that I thought were logical, but I was kind of like, I know I'm not an engineer. And he was like, "You're asking the best questions. They're so good. So it's just own it. And it's okay that we know you're not an engineer, but ask these questions." And so I think it's really important to also be okay with asking questions and not have to apologize for it, and be part of a team where you're all contributing different things. And it is an absolute truth that as you embark upon your careers and become leaders in your own right, and remember these words, you will literally never accomplish anything good alone. It will always be with a team, regardless of what that looks like. Maybe direct reports, maybe colleagues. Like, no great thing happens with just one person. And so everybody brings a different perspective, and asking questions and owning your lack of knowledge in certain areas, but bringing to the table the things that you do know is how great things happen in business or wherever you end up finding yourselves professionally.
Sometimes, particularly at schools where there's a lot of emphasis on technical expertise, we forget the soft skills. So I used to work with somebody who was very fond of saying, "You can be right or you can be happy." Could you talk a little bit about, over the course of your career, that side to that your career and that work, and particularly in teams, you're human beings figuring out how to navigate social relationships. Could you talk about the importance of those kinds of interpersonal skills?
The interpersonal skills and being able to work in a team is one of the most important things that I think is a consideration for success in your career. And I will say that I have evolved over my career for sure and have come a long way. I mean, when I was, a younger staffer in a city government, I just kind of had the things I needed to get done, and I'd go get them done, and I wanted to be fast and wanted to get them done well and move on to the next thing, and had less time to think about, who should I bring along? That's terrible. That is not a good way to have, as I shared earlier, sort of long-term sustainability, build partnerships and relationships, success. And so over time, I learned, sometimes the hard way and sometimes just by learning from other people better at this than me, that slowing down to align, to communicate and collaborate is going to result in much better, again, sustainable, ongoing results. And so that is something that's been a journey for me. And today, as a leader, I take that very seriously, that setting a vision, as I shared earlier, communicating, helping people align along something, even when it takes time and you're like, we got to get this done now, is always a better approach than just kind of going without any buy-in.
I should have noted, we have a class going on now that's focused on principles of business leadership, and today the students were discussing what we've been walking through the 12 principles that Benjamin Franklin sort of famously tried to aspired to achieve, and we asked the students, what would you add to the list? And the most popular was curiosity. So, good timing. It also, your earlier comment made me, about humility and curiosity, made me think of someone I used to work with who was utterly without guile and would say, "Explain it to me like I'm a sixth grader." I want to talk a little bit about your current role and the transition to the nonprofit sector. So a lot of people early on in their career, I'm reminded of a friend of mine who always said, the advice I got from an older mentor, if you if you pay your dues in the dues paying part of life, then you get to the milk and honey stage in life. But for a lot of people, that's a focus on, financial security and the focus on the money. And as you get further in your career, oftentimes there are other things, non-financial things that motivate you. Could you talk a little bit about what those other things are as you look for what you want in a career and the kind of work? You talked a little bit about the things that energize you and the things that drain you. What are the intangibles other than chasing the salary?
That's a great question. I think just being able to make an impact, and that can look like in so many different ways. So there's certainly not kind of one straight line to that path. But I think what really appealed to me to move to CICP was the opportunity to try to make a bigger impact beyond my own individual contributions. And CICP, maybe I can just do a very quick kind of flyover. It's a 27-year-old not-for-profit organization that brings the CEOs of industry together with the presidents of our R1 universities, including your president, Mung Chang, who's an awesome board member on CICP's board, and philanthropy. So those kind of three stools together to try to drive economic prosperity through the state through a number of different initiatives that help bring more resource, attention, collaboration in the state to drive economic prosperity. And I know that sounds like a lot of buzzwords, but maybe to kind of put it into perspective, right now, I'll give you an example. We have a really strong life sciences cluster of assets in Indiana that is very uncoordinated, and we don't have a really strong message collectively of how great we are. We have every bit of the assets here in Indiana that like a research triangle in North Carolina has. So our organization is working on trying to tell the story of our combination of ag, animal, and human life sciences and why we are the place where businesses should come, investors should invest, students should stay, talent should come, et cetera. Kind of our own version of an Indiana research triangle. We're working through the asset story, a name, a marketing and messaging that we're going to launch at an international bioconference in June this year. And I'm really excited about it. But that's the kind of thing that wouldn't just happen. One company isn't going to go do that. One university isn't going to do that. But an organization like CICP can bring it all together and do that. I'm really excited about that. But that's the kind of impact that I'd love to be a part of that's bigger than just one person or one organization. I'm
trying to think of maybe two ways of asking the question. But the first question I have is, people may wonder why businesses would get involved in a nonprofit, why they would take an interest in economic development. If you could talk a little bit about sort of the motivation for, a lot of people think that business is just about focusing on maximizing profit, and that's the job. So what motivates your organizations that you work with to be involved with CICP?
Well, I think it is about trying to be something bigger than just one entity. So each company, each university is going to have their own story too, and that's really important. But it is much better to be part of something bigger. And I will just kind of continue on this theme of the example I was just using. One of the companies that we were talking to about having Indiana's version of a research triangle, name TBD to come, was really appealing to them because they want to be able to say that they have their own assets and they're recruiting all the time. They want to say that here's what we have to offer with this company, but we're actually in the blank, region where there's 3 times the national average of patent activity, where we are the number one place to not only invent things, but also manufacture and move things. And sort of the bigger story, and they were saying, we can't wait for this to come out because we can't do that alone. We need someone to go out and market this and to have this message. And so that's the kind of thing that brings a tangible opportunity to a company, for example, who wants to tell their story, but also wants to be in a very exciting place that they can help recruit talent and investment and again, be part of something bigger.
So I'm curious because your career, you've had an opportunity to see business from 3 different perspectives, right? From within a business, from the government's perspective on business, and now at CICP. A lot of discussion about the sort of the public role or the responsibility of businesses and business leaders. How has that evolved as you've gained these different perspectives, your view of the sort of the purpose of business?
Yeah, I think being in this role has given me such an appreciation, and it's a little bit related to your earlier questions, to the CEOs who are engaged. I feel so grateful. Joanne, you're a good example. Your engagement in Agronovis and the community and being on the Purdue board, they don't have to do this, but for CICP with our CEOs who are engaged, they lend their time and their ideas and their resources for something bigger than just their own organization. And I really think that one thing that Indiana has that's really unique, because I'm part of a lot of national collaborations of like organizations to mine, we really are a place that collaboration is fairly easy. I was interviewing Scott Dorsey, who's a well-known entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur in Indiana last week at the Economic Club. And one of the audience members said, sent him a question that said, what are your thoughts about Indiana's really a two-call city, meaning that you can basically reach pretty much anyone of influence within 2 calls. And Scott actually corrected the person and said, I would argue it's a 1-call city. And it's true. Like, we have the ability to bring people together. Our CEOs, by and large, are approachable and humble for the most part, and really willing to kind of lean in. Jen Rumsey is a great example. I'll use her as a Purdue alum. She's the CEO of Cummins. She's also the chair of my board, which is so much fun. She is so approachable. She's running a global company, and she's doing an amazing job. But yet she gives her time to be the chair of our board and lends her ideas at her time. And I just think there's a very special level of collaboration. Rich, you may be able to talk to that a little bit from some of the communities you've come from, but I hear, at least in some of the peer groups that I'm in, that Indiana really does that well. And I think it's very, very special.
So I'm curious, on the theme of sort of, principles of character for effective leaders, now that you're in a nonprofit, one of the jokes that I used to make at my former place of employment when I was running an executive MBA program, and they would always say, you can do anything you want, you just can't lose money. And I would say, but the university is a nonprofit organization. That never was persuasive. But transitioning to an organization whose influence is, success, I guess we would say, depends on things like influence and trust and collaboration rather than whose success is measured in financial terms. Does that require a different sort of leadership approach, or are there different habits of character that are important in that kind of leadership role?
Well, I think so. I mean, every organization should have, and usually does have, their own way to measure their effectiveness, metrics, KPIs, financial returns, all kinds of different ways to look. And CICP is no exception. I've been in the role for 3 years. We, over the last couple of years, for the first time, have started to created, I should say, KPIs that are across all of our industry sectors. So CICP has 5 initiatives within it that focus on different industry sectors. And we wanted to kind of step back as a leadership team and see how all of our work together actually ladders up to big impact. And so we look at things like how many people we've impacted with workforce development initiatives, or how many startup companies we've been able to serve through our programs and things like that, just to understand what the impact is in some of our direct outputs. We also follow and track economic indicators for the state that we may not be the only, we are not the only entity to impact, but we think it's important to follow so that we can shape our work based on some of the key factors that we think are important, like productivity or GDP or wages, things like that.
One more on the work at CICP. What is it that you, and maybe this goes to what drew you to the role in the first place, but what is it you think you can accomplish in your current role that you couldn't perhaps either in local government or in the private sector?
Well, I just think what is really unique about this organization is the ability to bring higher education, business, and philanthropy together. And that's what this organization does. And that's something that I wouldn't be able to do in the previous roles that I held. And I still enjoyed those roles. There was a lot of purpose and other ways to make an impact, but this is unique because of that kind of tripod of those three entities coming together.
Just out of curiosity, because you obviously mentioned the work on economic development, but I'm curious what your members, what the CEOs of Indiana corporations are, what are the 2 or 3 things that they are most, I don't know if you would say worried about, but the most focused on right now in the current environment?
That's a good question. So we, across all of our industry sectors and initiatives, stepped back a couple of years ago to say, what are the top issues that we think together, based on feedback from our CEOs and other stakeholders, we need to really keep our eye on the ball and progress to meet our mission of driving economic prosperity for the state. And we leaned in on 5. One is driving more digital technology adoption to ensure that we continue to increase productivity. Another one is ensuring that we have adequate infrastructure in place, which is a little bit newer for CICP, but with transition to different technologies for energy sources, water and energy are more important than ever. Driving workforce development strategies to make sure that talent and workforce needs are meeting the needs of our employers and our people. Also, driving more entrepreneurship. We think having a very strong entrepreneurship economy is very important for economic prosperity. And last but not least, the 5th is really leaning into the advanced industries, which for us are largely defined as industries that are heavy in R&D and STEM. And so the way those show up in our organization is through our branded initiatives. One, AgriNovus, focuses on ag biosciences. Another one, BioCrossroads, focuses on life sciences. Connexus focuses on advanced manufacturing. TechPoint focuses on the tech industry. And then Ascend, our 5th initiative, focuses on talent and workforce across all of the industries. So those are the 5 things we know we need to keep our eye on the ball and drive many initiatives and programs that we have to advance all of those.
This is actually one of my favorite questions because it's rare you get somebody with your background who can speak to this. But suppose somebody wants to know why a business school is sending students with people like Professor Reifel to Washington D.C. What do you wish more businesses understood about local government or government, and what do you wish government understood better about businesses?
Professor Reifel, can I call on you? Well, that's a great question because I've been on both sides. I guess I wish that government would understand, and I'm not saying that they don't necessarily, but really understand that decisions need to be made not in political cycles, but in economic cycles. And so we shouldn't be making decisions based on just a couple of years based on political cycles. Like we really need to be thinking out because transformative change and action takes time. And so to really be thinking long term, that's one thing I would say. And then kind of back the other way, I would say that businesses should help governments understand what are the biggest challenges and be willing to lean in to try to help accomplish those, resolutions to those challenges. So, it might be easy for a business to say, for example, I don't have access to enough talent in this specific area of expertise. Well, be part of the solution. Lend your expertise, your team, to help figure out what is it that we need, help support the schools and making those decisions and financially where possible. So those are the 2 things I might relay back to each other.
Just 2 more, and then we'll open it up for some questions from the crowd. And these are very sort of off topic in some ways, but I've heard lots of people say it's really important to have something that you're passionate about in life outside of work. What are you passionate about outside of work?
Well, I'm a mom. That's a one of my favorite jobs. I've got 21-year-old twins, so it's so fun to be a parent, and I love it. And both my kids just happen to be in sports, one in soccer, one in running, so I love to go to their events and cheer them on. I'm very passionate about that. I love to read. I have been in the same book club with the same women for almost 30 years. It's so fun, and we read, we love to read books, and we get together, and we do talk about the book. A lot of book clubs don't, but we do. And then we still also talk about lots of other things. But that brings me a lot of energy and joy. And then last but not least, I really enjoy running. About 1 million years ago, I did run in college. Now I kind of shuffle, but I still love it, and it just brings me a lot of energy and joy. And I can't forget my dog. I love my dog. Spending time with my dog is great.
And then last one for me, someone had asked you I guess it was me, at the reception, but I'm curious, you mentioned one, but if you could go back, what couple of classes do you wish you'd at least explored, the classes you wished you'd taken when you were in college?
That was a good question I got asked before. I wish I had taken some more finance classes. I really do. I think that in school, it's great to learn. So, what do you say?
I ask guys like Rich.
Yes, finance or finance.
Finance.
Finance, but today I would say, and I kudos to Purdue and the board and the great leadership. I think the proactive approach to require some sort of exposure to AI through a project or a class, or I know there are different ways to do it. I think that was a great idea. Today, I would say I would absolutely embrace that. One thing that CICP is going to be launching here next week, so you're getting a little bit of a preview, is we'll be working with the state to roll out a statewide AI adoption campaign through workshops, various tools, but also matching students to real projects. And so more to come on that, but take the opportunity to take on a project and see what you can do to help, another company understand what AI is all about and give yourself some experience as well. And I know that that may sound kind of scary, but we're all learning this together. So I think that could be really exciting.
And just because I think it's such a great opportunity, do you want to share with them the extern internship with CICP?
One of our branded initiatives, TechPoint, has a great program, summer internship program every year called Extern. And so that's something to look out for. It's going to be going into actual internships here soon, but for next year to think about, there are internships that is a cohort of interns that come together, and it does take place in Indianapolis. So for students that are coming from West Lafayette or other places, they also work to help find housing together for those extern interns.
Let's take some of your questions. So if you would.
Yeah, I'm Vincent Kroll. I'm a sophomore here in finance and accounting. My question is, what is a habit you think we should all start forming in college now in order to make growth in our future?
That's a great question, Vincent. I think a good habit is to take time to get to know people a little bit outside of just your kind of day-to-day going to class. One of the things that I reflect on is even my 30-year-old book club. The people you meet now could be and will be really important people for you to stay in touch with over the years. And don't take that lightly. Keep those friendships. You guys will all go on to different interesting things here or elsewhere, and I really would value those. And the habit that you would start now is really leaning into those relationships. And then also don't be afraid to network. That's another thing that I think Indiana does a good job of. If there's someone that you want to learn more about what they're doing, don't be shy to reach out and ask if I could get, sometimes it's 15 minutes. That's actually meaningful, just to kind of hear a little bit more about your story. And so I would start those habits now, because those are really good habits later as well when you're in your professional career.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mincy. I'm a sophomore studying business management and economics. And my question is, have you ever had to make a decision or propose an idea that was initially unpopular? And how were you able to bring people together, gain that buy-in, and create positive change through that doubt?
It's a great question. Actually, we just had a name change at CICP. So we had been Central Indiana Corporate Partnership since the inception of the organization 27 years ago. And when I started in my role 3 years ago, one of the top kind of questions I got from stakeholders, especially when I was outside of Central Indiana, was like, why is your name Central Indiana Corporate Partnership? And our charter actually is statewide. Our operations and all of our initiatives operate statewide. So I went back to our internal team and I was like, have we thought about changing our name to like Indiana Corporate Partnership? And initially the feedback was really like, no, that's not a good idea. We're known for our name. There are a lot of complications with that to, go back and change your charter. And so I kind of initially was like, well, I guess let's let that go, because it seemed like maybe it wasn't a very good idea. But fortunately, with a lot of continued feedback, I asked our legal counsel, and I'm embarrassed I didn't think of this myself. I was like, well, is this going to be really difficult to do if we want to change? And he said, no, you can file a DBA, doing business as. So that kind of relieved that piece of it. And so it was kind of unpopular at first to even talk about changing our name, but as we kind of took some time, so I didn't rush it, and brought some people internally together and brainstormed on ideas, we started to talk about the fact that even saying Central Indiana Corporate Partnership doesn't tell you a lot about what we do. We convene CEOs, and that's part of what we do. And so we talked about it and came up together with CEOs of Indiana Corporate Partnership, which incidentally also allowed us to keep our acronym, CICP. And it was really like a group thing that started out as something that I was kind of afraid to keep pushing because it seemed like people were sort of frustrated and that wasn't a good idea. And with time and with some buy-in and collaboration, we actually brought that to our CICP board. And it was funny. We did a Slido poll and just said, do you think we should do this? And it was like 1 second went by and everybody said yes. And so then we decided to proceed, and it's been very positive feedback. So we are now CEOs of Indiana Corporate Partnership, CICP, instead of Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. But I will tell you, the easier path in the beginning would have been, well, I don't think I want to push it because there's, some people who don't think this is a good idea. People who, by the way, have been great and came along and decided, actually, that's a really good idea. So sometimes you got to just listen to the feedback, slow down a little bit, and see if you can get, some more buy-in and time. And in this case, that worked out.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Tajay. I'll repeat it or actually, let me do this.
Hi, my name is Tajay King. I'm a freshman studying accounting. And I wanted to go back to the question of how do you lead a group of experts when you're not the expert? And you answered that being humble and then curiosity were important aspects of that. And even earlier, you mentioned that trust was an important part of principal leadership. And I wanted to ask how you simultaneously acquire that trust as someone who's not the expert while maintaining that humbleness as well as that curiosity.
Great question. First of all, I am super impressed that you're an accounting major, because when we were in the earlier group, I said that was like one of the hardest classes for me. I thought it was so hard. So good for you. And it's so important. I think, to your question, especially as someone who is, did you say you're a freshman? Yeah, a freshman. You're just learning. And so just recognizing that that's what you're doing at this moment in time. And so asking questions is totally appropriate. And so after you graduate with your accounting degree and you have a lot of skills and knowledge in your first job, you'll still be in a spot where it's an opportunity to learn and not to have unrealistic expectations for yourself early on when you're just young in your career, it's okay to ask questions. But as over time you gain experience through the work that you do, being proud of that and helping others learn as well. I also think there's a lot to be said for setting the tone for people to not feel bad about asking questions who are around you. That's a really important sign of a good leader who is open to questions and facilitates people wanting to ask questions. And I think that comes with a level of humility, a level of curiosity, and wanting to do the right thing.
Other questions?
Hi, my name is Arya Joshi. I'm a freshman doing supply chain and operations management. I don't know how much you want to dive into this, but I was wondering, working for a company like Cummins, especially being, you said you did environmental science in college, working for a company that has been previously criticized by the EPA, how do you, as a vice president or something similar to that regards, deal with the ethics of wanting to be perceived as a publicly good company versus wanting to make profit for the company?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think I'll be specific to Cummins just because that's where I come from. I think Cummins has a lot to be proud of in terms of being a company that really prides itself in innovation to develop the best products that it can, including the products that have been really moving more into cleaner technologies. So in some cases, very low diesel emissions, and then in other cases, hydrogen, electric products. But for companies like Cummins who are innovating to do that, we wouldn't have those advancements. I think also recognizing that there are power needs, for all of us in all of the applications that Cummins is in. The company, when I was there, took the initiative to actually redo the entire kind of compliance organization so that it was really meeting the current needs of the regulators across the world, and created an independent entity to do that. So they're always trying to do better, not perfect. But I think that the balance of bringing innovation into a company to try to keep doing better and better is something to be really proud of.
Yeah.
My name is Ariane Bunsell. I'm a freshman studying IBE, which is the Integrated Business and Engineering major. You've mentioned, how you should lean into people, lean into relationships. Where would you say you normally find these types of people, like people you can rely on? And do you think there are places where you kind of should look away from?
Say a little bit more about that.
I understand that you can have good relationships with everyone, right? And you can build on these relationships with these people to get ahead in life. But I definitely do think there are times where you can kind of bank on some relationships that kind of just end up being a dead end. They don't really help you. So I was just wondering if you had any opinions on that.
Well, it's an interesting question. Thanks for asking that. I think that I'll apply it to when you're in business or your next professional journey where you may end up being. I think it's really important and sometimes overlooked to try to get to know the people that you're working with just as humans. And that doesn't mean you have to have lunch every day, or you might, but just try to get to know them because you're going to work together. And I think when you know someone and you know a little bit about them and their story, you tend to just work better together. And I would just offer that I don't think there's any downside to making that investment of time and getting to know someone, even if it is a relationship that doesn't, once you move on to the next project or another company kind of ends, that's okay. It's just part of life. And I think getting to know other people and, their story is just a great part of life, but also a good way to connect in business to try to do things together as a team. So I wouldn't worry too much about maybe where that goes. And if it's a dead end, to your point, I wouldn't really worry about that too much.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Surya. I'm currently a sophomore in finance. I'm just curious. I don't know if you mentioned this, but where do you see yourself in the future? Do you want to stay in the same industry or pivot to something else?
That's a great question. And I'm glad you said finance, not finance. So I've, been in the workforce now for, 30 plus years. So for me, where I go next, I don't know necessarily. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing right now. I will maybe answer it in a different way. When I look back, one of the things that I'm glad that I didn't do is feel like I had to know exactly where I was going next. I tended to be a person who would lean into something and really go all in and try to make an impact and enjoy the work that I'm doing and not think too much about what I wanted to do next. So I kept sort of an open door, and then I pivoted from law to government to business and now to something that's kind of a combination of all three. And so I would encourage thinking like that, as you think about your career ahead. And then for me, kind of what's next, right now, I'll just take my own advice that I just gave, which is I'm in the middle of something that I really believe in, that I really enjoy, and I'm leaning in. And I haven't really thought too much about maybe what's 5 years or so down the road. So we'll see. Maybe you'll invite me back in 5 years and we'll see what I'm up to.
It's got to be medical school, right?
That's right.
Let me ask a question, because I love this. This was another one suggested by a colleague. If you think about principled leadership, what lesson took you the longest to learn?
I think the lesson that took me the longest to learn is I tend to be like super everything's urgent and fast. Like, the more we got to get it done sooner. And that's really not often a good thing. And so to sometimes slow down and, I'm not saying that you just kind of stretch it out and there's no timetables. That's not the point. But just sometimes to slow down, reflect, make sure that people that are important to execute something are really apprised and bought into, and then working together as a team. And so I still, to this day, can continue to improve that, but I have come a long way, and that's been a lesson for me over time.
Is this the, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far?
It is. Yeah, exactly.
Any other questions? A few more, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Gavin McAtee. I'm a freshman studying BAME and supply chain. And my question was, you mentioned that at Cummins, you were leading a bunch of experts and that know more than you do in certain aspects. What is it like leading leaders, especially being at, the top of the chain and being a boss's boss? Was that a big transition for you, or maybe not?
It was a transition, and helping people become great leaders when you're leading is a really important part of good leadership. As kind of funny as that sounds, right? But that is a really important part of being a good leader. And one thing that I always took very seriously as well is succession planning. I was never scared of thinking of who might come after me. I actually liked and enjoyed mentoring people and leaders who could take on a role should I move on. And I would say my last two big jobs at Cummins, in both cases, the person that reported to me that I really believed in and really was excited to see maybe do the things that I wanted to do in the role that I was in could take that role when I left. And in both cases, two women that I still keep in touch with for my last two roles at Cummins were people who reported to me, and I tried to help be ready for that job, not knowing when I would leave. And I was never scared of that. I didn't look at it like, oh, I don't want someone else to shine. I actually thought we could shine together. So succession planning, if you're a leader, I think is a very important thing to do if you really care about the organization that you're in. And it's fun because then you help someone along. And that's not always going to work out. Sometimes you're going to go external for a person, but investing in that leader who works for you with the idea that they may even take your job someday and do better is something to embrace, not be scared of.
Thank you.
Got time for just a few more?
Yeah, I know I already asked a question, but what made you stay in Indiana? Like, what do you like about Indiana other than your job, obviously?
I love that question because I am not originally from Indiana, so I moved here to go to school. I think initially what kept me here was opportunity. My first job was here. What kept me here really has been continued opportunity, people, a great lifestyle in terms of affordability, but also I think interesting things to do that are often underappreciated. We have some of the best sporting in the world. We have a lot of cultural amenities and things like that. And so that's kept me here. But probably the people is the number one thing.
I mean, we love all of the trustees on the Board of Trustees, but if you had to pick a favorite trustee, no, that's actually not the question. When you think about the future of leadership in Indiana, what gives you hope? What do you find hope in?
What gives me hope about about the future of Indiana is that Indiana really does have a history of coming together and doing big things. And I personally have had the privilege to be involved in some of them. We didn't even talk about some of my volunteer roles. I was president of the Capital Improvements Board for 7 years. That's an organization in Indianapolis that helps build and run the sporting facilities. And so we got the WNBA to come here, the WNBA All-Star Game, I should say, the long-term agreement with the Pacers to redo the Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Like, I was part of those things, and just one part. There was lots of people involved, but in Indiana, we really do come together and do those kinds of things, and we have so much history of it. And so whether it's the Indiana version of a research triangle that you'll hear more about here in the coming weeks, or helping all of our businesses really adopt technology and AI so they can be more productive. I think those are things that Indiana does very well because we bring the community together. Not just CICP, many other organizations, but CICP is one of them that contributes to that, and it gives me a lot of optimism and excitement about the future.
I want to thank you all for coming out and for joining us. Those of you who are joining us online, thank you for your time and your attention. I know it's a busy time of year, but especially, Melina, we want to thank you for making the trip up and spending time. We don't want you to get home too late, so we'll wrap up, but please join me in thanking Melina for her time.